Hey everyone, Carrie Beck here with Homeschool Coffee Break, where we help you stop the overwhelm and take a coffee break. Sometimes we need a coffee break, and as it gets to the end of a school year, you really probably need a long coffee break all summer. Maybe too bad we can't just go to the beach the whole time. Hey, we're in the middle of a month of leadership education podcast. This is one of my favorite topics, one of my favorite months, because it took me 5 of my 10 homeschooling years to figure out what I was doing. And by the fifth year, I started figuring out leadership education from a Christian perspective. Then I sort of had to figure it all out myself because no one was out there really telling me what to do. And so today, what I want to do is talk about the difference between just schooling and education. And I think it really does relate to leadership education. As we get started, let me just remind you to subscribe wherever you're listening to this, especially if you haven't subscribed. We would love to get this out to more parents so that they truly give their kids an education, not just a schooling. So subscribe wherever you are listening to this and then share it with a friend. That would be awesome. So let's talk about homeschooling today. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I want you to think about what your answers are. All right. One of them is, and I've talked a little bit about this maybe just a few days ago. I can't remember in one of the podcasts. Are you on the conveyor belt? The conveyor belt does not teach you how to think. It teaches you how to school, and you follow the school system all the way down the road. The conveyor belt has 12 stations, one for every year of your 12 years of schooling. And you do the same thing as everyone else. Someone else is telling you what to do. There is no freedom. If you're on the conveyor belt, you're giving your children a schooling. Do you treat your kids as real people or an item on the school lesson plan checklist? I love checklists. I will write something down so I can cross it off. Can you relate to that? I know some of you can because you told me. And some of y'all like, Carrie, I don't think a checklist is bad. I don't think a checklist is bad either. When I create the checklist, when I listen to God and He shows me what I should be doing in my homeschooling. But if I am dependent on a lesson plan that someone else wrote and said, you must do this to finish this curriculum, that is a schooling because you're following someone else's. Or are you treating your kids like real people to give them an education? Does your homeschool relate to real life? If it does, you're giving your kids an education. Do your kids understand why you studied this, that, or the other? That's an education. Do you follow the crowd, whatever is cool, whatever is current? Now, there are some cool current homeschool trends that can be good, but if you're just following the crowd to do what everyone else is doing, that's a schooling. You're not thinking, you're just doing what someone's telling you to do. And you're raising your kids to follow just like you follow the crowd. I did not want that. You may. Now, this could be a co-op. It could even be CC, classical conversations. Everyone else is doing it. I'm going to go depend on them to tell me what to do. Now, again, those are good tools, but you need to make sure they are what's best for your family. Otherwise, it's a schooling. You are just following what someone else is doing. Are you modeling purpose and intention in your life? Or do you have double standards for you and your kids? You want your kids to have an education. You want them to love learning, but you are constantly scrolling your phone. Or you're so worried about having everything picked up all the time that your kids can't even have fun learning because they're so worried mom's going to have a hissy fit because some book is left on the coffee table. All right. Don't have a double standard. When you have a double standard, you're just giving them a schooling. You're not really giving them an education. Do you take time to develop godly character? Or is it just a checklist? Okay, we're going to work on this character and move on just because it's written there. How important are relationships with God in your family? That would be a spiritual education, a biblical education. All right. Those are just some things to consider. The cool thing about giving your kids a homeschool education instead of just a schooling is you have a lot of freedoms. I've talked about freedoms. I'm going to talk a little bit different perspective today. You have the freedom what to study, freedom when to study, freedom how to learn, freedom how long to study, freedom in what kind of educational experience they have. If you are following the schooling system, someone's telling you what to do. If you're really paying attention to an education, you can choose those things. Go back and listen. I just did a podcast on freedom in your homeschool. So I think it's important that as you move forward between the schooling and education, you need to think about what is an educated person. If you think an educated person just finishes high school and they do whatever they are told to do, they are just learning what to think. And that's what they provide in the public education, just what to think. When you move forward, when to think, that's a professional education. I talked a lot about this 2 weeks ago, so you can go back and listen to that podcast. I'll put the link wherever you're listening to this in the description and show notes. So maybe a professional education, maybe it's just a career. That would be a professional education. You're learning when to think. Or if an educated person is someone that knows how to think, because they put on the lens of the Bible and think critically, that is leadership education. There's a man named John Gatto who was the New York City Teacher of the Year and twice New York State Teacher of the Year. After the second time, he resigned by putting a letter to the editor, I want to say in the New York Times, New York Post, something like that. And after that, he has just gone, he's passed away just recently, but this is in the like 80s. Okay. So he knew the public school system very well. He's gone on to write about the history of public education, dumbing us down, and a better teacher, I think. Those are great books. I'll put a link to those as well, especially Dumbing Us Down and A Better Teacher. His comment is this: real books educate, school books school. Think about it. Real books educate, school books school. If you are using real books and you're talking about the concepts and you're talking about the characters, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, you are beginning to educate your kids. If you use school books and that's all you do, you're schooling them. Those are not my words. Those are John Gatto, the New York State Teacher of the Year twice. He knows the public school system very well. So what is the solution? We need to take a step back and look, I believe, at Christian leadership education. Christian leadership education, I'm going to go through 5 sections that you can go through. I will dive into 4 of them in 4 steps to raising Christian leaders. All right. Well, actually, we go through all of it, but it's set up a little bit differently. But 4 steps to raising Christian leaders. And that's a free class. There'll be a link wherever you're listening to it. So let's talk about, first, we have character foundation, because godly leaders are going to influence those around them. We want them to have godly character. Next, we want a biblical education. So we have character, but we want it from a biblical perspective. We want our kids to be able to think biblically. They put on their glasses, their Bible glasses, their lenses, and make sure that whatever they're doing is going through the grid or the lens of Scripture. Character, biblical education. We want them to have the tools of learning. You know, we talked about that a few weeks ago, so you can go back and I'll link that podcast too. We want them to have a love of learning so that they can learn for life. And then we want them to have those thinking skills. All right. So we've got character, biblical education, tools of learning, a love of learning, and critical thinking skills so that they can make wise decisions. Those are 5 parts of leadership education. But I would love for you to come to the class. You will get a lot out of it just coming to the class, because we will dive really deep into that. Heather Nations had this to say about freedom in homeschooling and whether we're giving our kids a schooling or an education. She said, homeschooling should be customized. I often find myself comparing and being afraid that I am not doing things right. I love the information about Christian homeschooling. This really helps me to see where to proceed for our homeschooling future by focusing on virtues. So she was trying to get away from that comparison trap. Comparison trap, that's a schooling. It is not real education. So you need to pop off of that. And so what I want to do is just close with what I think real education is. This is from the Bible. And these words which I command to you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as signs on your hand and frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. And the part I forgot to write on this paper is about loving the Lord your God. We need to start with loving God at the very beginning, us, and then just spending all day long, always educating, right? It's not just sit down and do book work. Your children see what is most important to you. Are you seeking God? He will show you how to give your kids an education. Remember, education and schooling are not equivalents. What do you want? An education or schooling? Hey, I'm Carrie back with Homeschool Coffee Break. I'll talk to you next time.